Berserk is one of those stories that stay with you for a long time. I wanted to wait until I caught up with the manga before I made this video because I honestly have so many thoughts that I want to put into words. Now that I had time to process Kentaro Miura's magnum opus over the last few months, there are just so many themes, messages, epic scenes, and characters that I would love to go into. This video centers specifically on the manga's Golden Age arc in the 97 anime adaptation, which is considered the best of the three we've gotten so far, and holds Berserk's most iconic moments. But I chose to extend it for the rest of the manga, since there is just so much to explore. So get ready, because we are about to dive into the world of Berserk. The story is set in a dark, fictionalized version of medieval Europe. The Kingdom of Midland and the neighboring areas have a lot of inspiration from historical elements of France, Spain, Germany, and Italy, as well as different tones that ebb and flow in a fantastic way. The series and manga explore kingdom bureaucracy, war, politics, mercenaries, what medieval humans were capable, and also leans heavily into fantasy. Some of my favorite parts of Berserk were the characters facing off against horrifying monsters straight out of nightmares. This ties heavily into one of the main themes of the story, which is overcoming the worst that the world has to offer, sometimes through perseverance and grit, other times through sheer strength. Guts, as a protagonist, is phenomenal. He is a character whose journey shows us a lot about resilience, acceptance, and stoicism. We get to see his entire life from the moment he was born to the present day in the manga. His life is one of the most tragic stories I have ever read or seen in any media, but one of the most important themes of Berserk is accepting that the past is unchangeable, and instead focusing on the present and future for your good and others. This is seen at several points, where Guts learns to enjoy the present with different groups of companions, which make for some of the most heartwarming moments in the manga, especially in the second half. His character constantly faces struggle, but he also gets time to breathe, showing us that not everything in life is evil despite him facing atrocity after atrocity. Personally, this philosophy while reading the manga became very palpable, and it helped me personally by relating to Guts in several ways. His journey is one that will be analyzed for a very long time, and I am eager to see where it leads next, since the story is not even close to being finished. Griffith, the White Hawk, is one of the most complex characters I've seen in any work of fiction. From the very beginning, you know that something is very wrong with him. Although as the Golden Age arc story progresses, you realize that you can't put your finger on it, until more about his character is revealed. The story surrounding his dream makes more sense in the second half of the manga, and you start noticing how the patterns that were there from the very start shape his character. I personally love his interactions with Guts, the way you can sympathize with his character knowing what he suffers throughout the course of the story, but at the same time, he is a character that you love to hate. Casca, as the deuteragonist of Berserk, has a very powerful and important role in both the Band of the Hawk and the overall story. I love the way her character develops along with Griffith and Guts across the Golden Age arc, and her strength and determination becoming something to admire. Without spoiling much, her character suffers from terrible events that change her fundamentally, but you never stop rooting for her. The relationship she has with Guts especially hit me hard, making me cry on many occasions, but at the same time provided some of the most beautiful moments in all of Berserk. She's a character that I am also eager to see where her journey ends. The drama in this series is also amazing. The characters are excellently written and realistic. Their motivations and conflicts flow tremendously, and we see their development in a great way. In the second half of the Golden Age arc, there is a very interesting conflict within the Kingdom of Midland, which reminded me of Game of Thrones or The Lord of the Rings. From the assassinations, conspiracies, love affairs, to one of our characters trying to move up in the Midland aristocracy. These sections of the story offer a lot of entertainment and deal with important themes. There is one thing that is more of a criticism of the manga than the anime, and that is that in the early chapters, Berserk has an abundance of sexual violence that can really put off a lot of readers. A lot of these scenes are toned down or completely cut off from the anime, which I understand, and one can make the argument that portraying this is important and necessary, given the historical context of the setting and how it relates to the trauma of the main characters. However, in the manga, I do feel that the line gets crossed at many points, especially in those scenes involving certain monsters. Ugh. However, I recognize that Miura uses these scenes and heavy topics in a way that showcases how true evil exists in this universe, contrasting from the good of characters such as Guts, Puck, and Shirky later on. And also how other characters such as Farnese, Griffith, and Serpico also go through periods of contested morality, which adds to the brilliance of Berserk. Few fictional stories manage to cross these lines while at the same time having a purpose for their portrayal, and I have to commend Miura for that in a way. Another thing, I can see that the 1997 show's budget was very limited. There are a lot of outdated animation techniques, such as an abundance of still shots and weird sequences, but in some way it also adds to a nostalgic charm to it. For example, in the goofier action sequences, which are a far cry from today's Demon Slayer type of visual spectacles. But after seeing the atrocious 3D animation of the 2016 series adaptation, I think this is 1,000 times better. And like I said before, adds to the charm of the series. The nostalgic air it has also enhances some of the most touching moments of the manga, along with the soundtrack by Susumu Hirasawa, which is iconic in a lot of ways. From now on, I'm gonna discuss heavy spoilers for Berserk, so beware. Having read the manga, I realized that there are a ton of scenes that were cut or changed from the source material, such as the Bakiraka assault and the tunnels beneath the castle, the chase after the band rescues Griffith, to the almost complete omission of the iconic Black Swordsman arc, which includes the fan favorite Puck. I don't know what the purpose of cutting these scenes were, although it is completely understandable for Wild and the Black Dog Knights. Ugh. As I will discuss next, there was space for at least 2 to 3 extra episodes to add more material and wrap up the arc in a satisfying way. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that as the manga's perfection still exists, these things in the adaptation are inconsequential. There are many beautiful, profound, and inspiring moments in Berserk, starting with how Guts finds calm and happiness despite his tragic childhood. The bonding moments with the Band of the Hawk, his blooming romance with Casca, and even moments with Griffith, which add to the development of his character. These are some of my favorite things in the story, contrasting from the equally awesome action scenes. The series culminates in what is probably one of the most terrifying and bleak sequences I've ever seen, only short of the end of Evangelion, which funnily enough also came out in 1997. It must have been a tough existential year for anime fans. But the Eclipse scene, where Griffith sacrifices the Man of the Hawk, is one of the most terrifying and masterfully executed sequences I've ever seen. A masterclass in cosmic horror. You can feel the band's terror. The scenes with Griffith's memories add an emotional layer, as well as the beginning of Guts' rage and feelings of betrayal. The way it is portrayed in the manga before, during, and after, as well as the lasting consequences of these chapters, are phenomenal. Now, there is something that really, truly bothered me about this anime adaptation. It has nothing to do with the story, as everything in Berserk, especially the darkest and most repulsive moments, have a purpose in the twisted mythology and character exploration Miura created. The reason that the ending of the anime upset me so much is that it ends in such an abrupt and bleak note that eclipses, pun intended, the amazing quality and pacing of the rest of the 25 episodes. The traumatic moment where Griffith, reborn as Femto, violates Casca, after Guts cuts his arm off and they both experience what is arguably the worst moment of their lives, is a key plot point in the manga. However, it cuts to the credits right after that, with a post-credit scene that lets you know that he somehow escaped the eclipse, before setting off to get revenge on Griffith. This is my only negative of the show, and why I'm unable to give it 100 out of 100 like the manga. Although fortunately, the Golden Age movies released years later managed to fix this obvious mistake. Overall, there are so many amazing moments in the 1997 show that I loved, and as I said before, it is the best adaptation. It cuts a lot of material in order to give it more appeal to mainstream audiences, which I understand, so I won't consider that as a negative. But to be honest, there's a conversation to be had about the value of the manga, and if you understand that a lot of the violence portrayed adds to the purpose of the story, I cannot recommend reading it enough. Now, I'm gonna leave behind my thoughts about Berserk from 1997 and continue with my thoughts about the overall manga series, which follow the Golden Age arc. The Conviction, Millennium Falcon, and Fantasia arcs each have their own share of amazing moments, introduction of key characters, and further character development of Guts and company. I'll only go over each arc briefly, since analyzing each part of these wonderful chapters will take me forever. But I still highly recommend that people read until the current chapter because it is really worth it. In the Conviction arc, we follow Guts after the traumatic events of the Eclipse. This arc also explores heavy themes surrounding religion, the history of the Inquisition, and blind faith through Farnese's character. I love the way that the story picks up and handles these themes and sets the stage for Guts no longer being a loner. It also explores areas of the world we haven't seen before, as well as new terrifying villains such as Father Mosgus. The Millennium Falcon arc further builds upon the new characters of Isidro, Serpico, but especially Farnese, who becomes a much more interesting and different character after her encounter with the Black Swordsman. We also see the return of OG Griffith and a new terrifying threat in the form of the Kushan Empire and Emperor Ganishka. This is probably the most action-packed arc, building up to a cataclysmic ending. It also introduces the iconic Berserker armor that Guts starts wearing, a cursed, powerful armor that makes him much stronger in exchange for his long-term health. I thought this plot element was so badass each time it was used, and added an interesting new storyline and villain with the wolf that accompanies Guts with the Berserker armor. In the Fantasia arc, there is a huge tonal shift that in my opinion works well in all the amazing ways. I mentioned in the beginning of this video that I adore Berserk's dark tone, monster design, and shocking horror moments. However, Shirky and the story with the witches, elves, and magical beings especially piqued my interest. I absolutely love fairy tale fantasy. And over this arc and the next one, Miura brilliantly adds lighter tones that at first glance would seem to contrast with the original dark themes and situations of the beginning. But instead, we see a lot of room for exploring these settings and characters in ways that I didn't expect. and at the same time made me feel nostalgic for stories from my childhood. I love the way that Shirky explains the lore behind the magic in this world, helps Guts achieve his goals, and goes through her own character development, making her a brilliant antagonist in the later volumes. It also introduces a fantastic pirate and high seas stories, which I admit made me very happy since I love these kinds of stories. Finally, this arc also ends up in a beautiful exploration of Casca's character and her relationship with Guts. Where Millennium Falcon is the most action-packed, Fantasia is the arc that contains the most amount of moments that made me cry. Don't even get me started on the Chich chapter, or Farnese and Shirky's journey into Casca's mind, moments that made me bawl for the whole time I was reading. For these reasons, the Fantasia arc is my favorite. To conclude, Berserk is beyond a must-read. It is one of those works of art that change your life in more than one way, with characters and stories that make you ponder on the human experience, the meaning of good and evil, and the power of resilience. I absolutely loved every single moment, and I really hope there's another work of fiction that impacts me on the same level that Berserk did. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and watch the rest of my videos where I talk about the philosophy of movies, video games, and comic books. So that will be everything for today, and have an amazing rest of the week.